Todd and Rachel Winkler seemed like the perfect suburban couple, a decorated Air Force veteran and a devoted mother of three, living an enviable life behind white picket fences. But behind their picturesque facade was a chilling secret that would shatter their family forever. When Rachel was found brutally murdered in their home, all eyes turned to the man who claimed he had killed her in self-defense. What unfolded next revealed a twisted double life, calculated deceit, and a terrifying truth hidden in plain sight. Despite his clean-cut exterior, had a temper that flared in unpredictable ways. She even signed up for couples counseling, though Todd refused to go. She wanted to believe he could change. She wanted to believe the man she fell in love with, the charming, driven, good-hearted person, was still in there somewhere. But the cracks in their marriage were growing deeper. It wasn't just yelling, it was icy silence, guilt-tripping, and moments of aggression that Rachel couldn't always explain. Todd's mood swings were worsening. Rachel began spending more time at her parents' house. He appeared calm, composed even, despite what had just occurred. No one had heard screams. No one had seen Rachel in distress that morning. What they did know was that Todd had called 911 after the attack, not during. And the wounds on Rachel's body, deep, repetitive, focused on lethal areas, didn't match the quick, chaotic nature of a self-defense struggle. His explanation stayed consistent. He said Rachel was unstable, that she had been struggling emotionally, and that she'd snapped. He described her as angry, paranoid, and volatile in the days leading up to the incident. He said he tried to help her, tried to be patient. But that morning, she had simply lost control. She once told a friend she didn't feel safe at night. Todd Winkler's voice was frantic, telling the dispatcher that his wife had attacked him with scissors and that he had to defend himself. Paramedics and sheriff's deputies rushed to the Winkler residence, expecting a domestic dispute that had spiraled out of control. But what they found was far worse than anything they could have imagined. Inside the master bathroom, Rachel Winkler lay motionless on the floor, soaked in blood, her body covered in deep, violent wounds. A pair of bloodied scissors lay nearby, but the scene didn't look like self-defense. It looked like slaughter. Her friends urged her to take the children and leave, but she hesitated. Divorce, she believed, would make him snap. She was afraid of what he might do. And when they fought, it wasn't just a disagreement. It was psychological warfare. It would twist her words, isolate her from her family, and tell her she was imagining things. She began to doubt herself. Todd Winkler seemed like the kind of man anyone would want as a neighbor. He lived in a quiet, tree-lined suburb in Northern California with his wife Rachel and their 2 young children. Their home was modest but tidy, the lawn always trimmed, the windows gleaming, the laughter of children often echoing from the backyard. To outsiders, their life looked perfect. Todd worked in the pharmaceutical industry, a respected executive with a military background that only added to his polished image. He wore suits during the day and sweatpants in the evening, pushing his kids on swings or reading bedtime stories through their open window. He repeated his story, that Rachel had come at him in a rage and he had no choice but to protect himself. He said it had all happened so fast that he had only acted to survive. Officers noted a small cut on his arm, but nothing serious. In contrast, Rachel's body showed multiple stab wounds, especially around her neck and upper chest. The violence of the attack stunned even the most experienced detectives. It didn't seem like the actions of someone fighting for his life. It looked like something else entirely. To his colleagues, he was intelligent and ambitious. To neighbors, he was friendly and polite. To friends, he was dependable. But inside his own home, the truth was far more complicated. Rachel Winkler was known for her kindness and devotion to her children. A former flight attendant, she had stepped back from her career after their second child was born, focusing instead on raising their family. She loved being a mother, but close friends noticed a change in her demeanor over time. She began to appear tired, sometimes anxious, her bright smile dimming slowly. When asked if everything was all right, she'd brush it off, saying she was just overwhelmed. But those closest to her would later say she had started to confide small things that hinted at something darker. She described Todd as controlling, often angry without warning. He could be charming in public and cold at home. She said she felt like she was walking on eggshells, never sure which version of him she'd get each day. There were no visible bruises, no police calls, no recorded evidence of abuse. And yet the atmosphere in the house was beginning to change. Still, Rachel tried to make the marriage work. She wrote in journals. She made plans to possibly return to work. Behind the walls of their suburban home, the illusion was breaking. No one could have guessed how right she was. It was early morning when the 911 call came in. Todd was standing in the living room when police arrived, dressed in blood-stained clothes. His face was pale, but he wasn't crying. Investigators immediately began collecting evidence. They photographed the scene, took samples, and began questioning Todd. Detectives weren't convinced. They spoke with neighbors who reported hearing raised voices from the Winkler home. But nothing that sounded like a physical struggle. An autopsy was ordered. Forensic teams began reconstructing the timeline. Todd's story didn't quite add up. There were no defensive wounds on his arms or hands. Many had suspected the marriage was troubled, but none had imagined it would end in violence. And a growing sense that this wasn't a tragic accident. It was something far more sinister. At first glance, Todd's resume was impressive. A former U.S. Air Force officer. He had worked on classified military projects and later transitioned into a high-paying role in the pharmaceutical industry. He was smart, polished, and highly skilled in both science and strategy. Although no commonly known poisons were detected, traces of sedative compounds were found in her bloodstream, ones not prescribed to her. More disturbing still, a search of Todd's computer revealed internet searches for terms like poison symptoms and how to make someone sleepy without them knowing. These were searches done years ago in passing. They had been made just days before Rachel S.'s death. The dosage wasn't enough to kill, but it was enough to impair. It suggested Rachel may have been drugged in the hours or minutes before the attack, making it nearly impossible for her to defend herself. They claimed he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, brought on by his years in the military. They said Rachel had become erratic and violent in the months leading up to her death. The defense argued that Rachel had flown into a rage on the morning of the incident, attacking Todd with a pair of scissors, and that he had no choice but to fight back. It was self-defense, they insisted. A tragic outcome, but not a crime. It was something more calculated, more chilling. The smiling father, the polished executive, the decorated veteran, it was all a mask. The wounds on Rachel's body weren't consistent with a quick struggle. There were multiple deep stabs, many to her neck, and they showed a clear pattern, deliberate, targeted, and excessive. Rachel had defensive wounds, but Todd did not. His single minor scratch didn't line up with the story of a violent scuffle. The blood spatter in the bathroom indicated that Rachel had been low to the ground when many of the wounds were inflicted. She had been subdued, not attacking. And behind that mask, a dangerous plan had been unfolding. But beneath the surface, there were signs of something darker. Signs that had gone unnoticed for years. Todd Winkler sat calmly beside his defense attorneys, dressed in a neatly pressed suit, his expression unreadable. He looked more like a business executive at a board meeting than a man accused of murdering his wife in cold blood. The courtroom lights cast sharp shadows across his face, highlighting the cool stillness in his eyes. He showed no visible emotion as the prosecution presented graphic photos of the crime scene. To many observers, it was unsettling, as if the man on trial was watching someone else's story unfold. They didn't believe Todd's story. They said Rachel had been scared, not dangerous. Rachel had become more fearful over the last few months. She had told a close friend that she believed Todd was trying to control her, not just emotionally, but physically. She was afraid to eat anything he cooked, and she had even started hiding food in her car. Despite this, she hadn't left. With 2 young children and a controlling spouse, she may have felt trapped. She wanted out, not a fight. And now, she was gone. Much of the information was redacted. But what was accessible revealed that Todd had been involved in research linked to psychological manipulation and chemical testing. The projects were secretive and involved behavior-altering substances. While there was no direct evidence linking his military experience to criminal behavior, the nature of his work raised questions about how someone trained in such methods might apply that knowledge in his personal life. Rachel, on the other hand, had bruising on her wrists and arms, suggesting she had tried to block the attack. There was also something chilling about the precision of the injuries. They weren't random, were focused, almost surgical. As word of Rachel's death spread, her family and friends were devastated. What remained was a blood-soaked bathroom, a widowed husband insisting he was the victim. As investigators dug deeper into Todd Winkler's life, they began to uncover a series of unsettling details that painted a different picture of the man, who claimed he had only been protecting himself. Detectives obtained Todd's military records. Around the same time, Rachel's family turned over something crucial: her personal journals and a series of video recordings she had kept on her laptop. The contents were disturbing. In several entries, Rachel wrote about feeling physically ill after meals Todd prepared. She described episodes of extreme fatigue, dizziness, and confusion. Doctors had brushed it off as stress or hormonal changes, but Rachel wasn't convinced. In one of the video clips, her voice was shaky as she said, "I know something's wrong. I don't feel safe here. If anything happens to me, I want people to look at Todd." Investigators began to consider the possibility that Rachel had been slowly poisoned. Toxicology reports from her autopsy were revisited. This revelation completely changed the tone of the investigation. Todd had claimed self-defense, but if Rachel had been incapacitated beforehand, his story unraveled. As friends and family were interviewed, a consistent pattern emerged. The growing pile of evidence suggested this was a crime of passion or a moment of panic. When the trial began, the courtroom was filled with curiosity, tension, and grief. Todd's legal team framed him as a devoted husband and a victim of circumstances. But the prosecution dismantled that version of events piece by piece. They began with the forensic evidence. The wounds on Rachel's body weren't consistent with a quick struggle. There were multiple deep stabs, many to her neck, and they showed a clear pattern: deliberate, targeted, and excessive. They were strong enough to impair her, possibly making her drowsy or disoriented at the time of the attack. The prosecution suggested this was not just a random argument that got out of control. It was premeditated. Todd had incapacitated his wife to make her an easier target. Rachel had defensive wounds, but Todd did not. His single minor scratch didn't line up with the story of a violent scuffle. The trial had ended, but the questions surrounding his true nature had only deepened. To the public, Todd had been unmasked as a cold and calculated killer. A man who had once worked alongside Todd at a defense research facility came forward anonymously. He claimed that years earlier, Todd had discussed human behavior in strange and unsettling ways. Her focus, they've said, is on giving the children a life untouched by their father's crimes. But they did release one statement to the media: "Our daughter saw something in him none of us did. And when she tried to escape, he made sure she never could. We will never forgive him." He reportedly spoke about compliance chemicals, substances that could make people more obedient, confused, or emotionally vulnerable. Not because of his crime, prison is full of killers, but because of the way he talks. It's a story about deception, about how easily evil can hide behind a smile and a resume. It's a warning that monsters don't always come with a mask. Sometimes they wear the face of a husband, a father, a friend. No one sees them coming until it's too late. Flat, calculated, empty, even in a place filled with violence, something about Todd disturbs people. At the time, it had seemed like harmless theorizing. It sounded like something else, a blueprint. Yet those who knew him continued to struggle with a single haunting thought: how could someone so outwardly normal, even impressive, commit such a brutal and deliberate crime? The blood spatter in the bathroom indicated that Rachel had been lowered to the ground when many of the wounds were inflicted. He didn't show remorse when speaking about Rachel's death. Instead, he spoke of it in clinical terms, as if analyzing a laboratory experiment. He never cried. He never expressed guilt. In his mind, what he had done was necessary. To some experts, Todd fit the profile of a high-functioning sociopath, someone capable of mimicking emotions without actually feeling them. His charm, intelligence, and success had masked a darker core: the ability to manipulate, deceive, and destroy. She had been subdued, not attacking. Then came the toxicology report. Though not immediately obvious, further analysis confirmed the presence of sedative compounds in Rachel's system. She had even consulted a lawyer shortly before her death. That, it seemed, was the trigger. For someone like Todd, losing control was unacceptable. Rachel's decision to end the marriage had sealed her fate. But the manner of her death, the planning, the manipulation, the cruelty, suggested something beyond rage. It was domination, the final act of control. The most damning evidence came from Todd's own digital trail. Investigators recovered deleted internet searches from his home computer. Among them were phrases like how to kill someone without getting caught, sleep-inducing chemicals, and self-defense loopholes. Rachel's friends described a man who isolated her, monitored her communications, and often dismissed her concerns. They said she had expressed a deep fear that if she tried to leave, he would do something terrible. These searches had been conducted just days before the murder. There was no applause, no outburst, just silence. Todd sat still, his face as calm as it had been on day one, as if the outcome had never really mattered. For everyone else in that room, the reality was crushing. Justice had been served. But only after a nightmare had already unfolded. Combined with Rachel's private journal entries and videos, it became clear to the jury that she had feared for her life, and for good reason. The prosecution also brought in witnesses who testified to Todd's controlling behavior. After 5 days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. After the verdict, Todd Winkler was transferred to a maximum security prison to begin serving his life sentence without the possibility of parole. Psychological evaluations performed after his conviction revealed troubling findings. One prison psychiatrist described Todd as emotionally detached and lacking empathy. As the story gained more attention, a new voice emerged. Investigators had never found a clear motive beyond Rachel wanting a divorce. She had been preparing to leave him. Rachel's parents took custody of the children. They moved out of state and have rarely spoken publicly since the trial. Today, Todd Winkler remains in solitary confinement for his own safety. Other inmates reportedly avoid him. In the end, the case of Todd Winkler is more than just a story of murder.